I died for 3 minutes. That's what the doctors said. 3 minutes without a heartbeat. 3 minutes without breath. But when I came back, the mirror didn't. At first, it was subtle. A blink that came too late. A smile that lagged behind my own. Then it started doing things I didn't do. This isn't a story about reflections. It's about what followed me back, and why mirrors don't lie, they hesitate.
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1. I died, and something noticed. The rain had been falling for hours before the accident. The kind of rain that erased edges and softened the world into reflections and blur. The road shimmered like black glass beneath the headlights, stretching forward in a way that felt endless, hypnotic. The car moved too fast for the conditions, though the man behind the wheel didn't realize it, not at first. His thoughts were elsewhere, circling a dull ache in his chest, the quiet exhaustion that had settled into his bones over the past few months. The moment came without warning. A flash of white, the shriek of metal screaming against metal, the sound of glass bursting outward like 1,000 sharp breaths. The impact folded the car inward. Steel crumpled. The steering wheel snapped forward. His body lurched, restrained only briefly before pain erased sensation. There was no dramatic slow motion, no cinematic pause, only violence, sudden and absolute. Then came the falling. Not downward, but inward, as if his awareness were collapsing into itself. Sound stretched and thinned. The world vanished. The world narrowed to a single point of pressure behind his eyes, and then even that gave way. Darkness followed. Not sleep, not unconsciousness, but something deeper. A vast, airless stillness. No up or down. No time. Just the awareness that something essential had stopped. 3 minutes, the doctors would later say. 3 minutes without a heartbeat. 3 minutes without breath. In that space, there were no memories, no visions of light or loved ones waiting beyond a threshold. There was only the sensation of being observed. Not watched, exactly. Noticed. Like the subtle shift in a room when someone realizes they are no longer alone. Then the door closed. Or almost did. When consciousness returned, it did so painfully. Sound crashed back first, the rhythmic beep of a monitor, distant voices muffled by walls and masks. Smell followed, sterile antiseptic layered over something coppery and wrong. His body felt foreign, heavy, stitched together by aches and restraints he didn't remember earning. His eyes opened. A ceiling stared back at him, too white, too close. For a long moment, he couldn't move. Panic flickered, then dulled under the weight of exhaustion. A nurse noticed the change and leaned into his field of vision, her face swimming slightly, distorted by tears or drugs or both. "Welcome back," she said softly, as if afraid to scare him away again. Back. The word echoed strangely. They told him later what happened, the accident, the rain, the delay before the ambulance arrived. They used careful language, clinical phrases designed to soften the truth. Cardiac arrest, temporary death, successful resuscitation. They smiled when they said it, as if survival were the end of the story. But even in that hospital room, surrounded by machines designed to measure life, something felt wrong. Not pain. Pain was expected. This was something quieter, a misalignment, like a picture hung just slightly crooked, noticeable only if you stared too long. He slept, or thought he did. Dreams came in fragments, reflections without faces, hallways that ended in mirrors instead of doors, the sensation of standing still while something else moved where he should have been. When he woke again, hours later, the room was darker. Evening pressed against the window, turning the glass into a faint mirror. For a moment, he avoided looking at it. The instinct surprised him, sharp and immediate, like pulling a hand away from a flame. Eventually, he glanced anyway. His reflection stared back. At first, everything seemed normal. Pale skin, bruises blooming beneath the surface, bandages at his temple, his own eyes tired and unfocused. Then he blinked. The reflection blinked a fraction of a second later. It was so small he almost missed it, a delay so slight that it could be explained away by fatigue or medication. He frowned, and the reflection followed, again just a heartbeat behind. His pulse quickened. He looked away, then back. This time the reflection matched him perfectly. A wave of relief washed through him, shaky and embarrassed. Of course it did. Mirrors didn't lag. Brains did, especially injured ones. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Still, unease lingered. Over the next few days, the feeling followed him. Doctors came and went. Machines were disconnected. He was praised for his recovery, for being lucky. Family visited, their faces tight with relief and something else, something like uncertainty, as if they were waiting for him to say or do the wrong thing. He didn't mention the mirror. At home, the house felt unchanged. Same narrow hallway, same bathroom with the old mirror above the sink, its edges slightly clouded with age. Familiar, comforting. That night, he stood in front of it and watched himself breathe. In, out. The reflection followed. In, out. Then, just once, it inhaled a moment too late. His stomach tightened. He raised his hand slowly. The reflection mirrored the motion, lagging just enough to be noticeable now that he was looking for it. Not broken, not distorted, delayed. A thought surfaced, cold and uninvited. I didn't wake up alone. He stepped back from the mirror, heart pounding, and laughed under his breath. The sound felt thin in the quiet room. "Get a grip," he muttered. But as he turned away, he felt it again, that same sensation from the darkness between heartbeats. The certainty of being noticed. And somewhere, just beyond the glass, something learned how long it took him to look away.
Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The first time the mirror hesitated. The house greeted him with silence, not the comforting quiet of familiarity, but something hollow, like a room that had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe back in. The front door clicked shut behind him, and for a moment he stood there, keys still in his hand, listening. The refrigerator hummed somewhere deep in the kitchen. Pipes ticked softly in the walls. Ordinary sounds, safe sounds. He told himself that was enough. Hours passed, though outside the afternoon light barely seemed to move. He drifted through the house slowly, testing his weight against the floors, reacquainting himself with corners and door frames, as if they might have shifted while he was gone. Every step felt slightly delayed, like his body was checking with something unseen before obeying. In the bathroom, the mirror waited. It was the same one he'd owned for years, oval, rimmed in dull metal, spotted faintly near the edges where age had eaten into the glass. He had looked into it thousands of times without incident, shaving, brushing his teeth, practicing smiles he never used. Now he hesitated. The air in the bathroom smelled faintly of soap and damp towels. The light buzzed overhead, too bright, flattening everything into sharp clarity. He leaned closer to the sink, gripping the porcelain edge, and finally raised his eyes. His reflection looked tired. That was the first thought. Pale skin, shadows under the eyes, a thin line of bruising at the throat where the seatbelt had bitten him. It was him, unmistakably. The relief was immediate and embarrassing. He smiled. The reflection smiled back. Just a moment too late. Not enough to scream, not enough to step back, just enough to feel it. A fraction of a second, the kind of delay most people would never notice unless they were already afraid. His heart thudded harder. He blinked deliberately. The reflection followed, again slightly behind. He frowned. Same result. "Okay," he murmured, the words swallowed by the small room. "Mirrors don't think until they do." The phrase drifted through his mind unbidden, absurd and unsettling. He shook his head sharply as if to dislodge it. Medication, he decided. Trauma. Shock. His brain was still catching up to the fact that it had stopped and started again. That sort of thing didn't come with instructions. He tested it. He lifted his right hand slowly, counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3. The reflection rose with him, smooth and perfect, just barely trailing like a shadow struggling to keep up with its source. He dropped his hand. The reflection followed. The delay remained consistent, predictable. That helped somehow. Consistency meant rules. Rules meant control. He laughed quietly, a short sound that echoed too much. "See," he said, to no one. "You're fine." The reflection laughed with him. This time it was on time. Relief washed over him so strongly his knees felt weak. He turned away from the mirror and busied himself with small tasks, unpacking the hospital bag, rinsing a glass, opening a window to let in air that didn't smell of antiseptic. Each action grounded him, tethered him to the physical world. Still, the bathroom called to him. Every so often, he caught himself glancing toward the doorway, listening for something he couldn't name. When he finally returned, night had begun to gather outside. The window over the sink was now a dark rectangle, the glass reflecting the room back at itself. He stood farther away this time. The reflection stood farther away too. He raised his hand suddenly, without warning. The reflection raised its hand. Too late. A chill crawled up his spine, slow and deliberate. His pulse quickened, and with it came a strange, irrational anger at the mirror, at himself, at the fragile explanations he kept stacking up like cards. "Stop it," he said, louder now. The reflection mouthed the word a beat behind him. "Stop." He stepped closer until his breath fogged the glass. The reflection's breath did the same, but the timing was off, the fog blooming a hair later than it should have. Mirrors don't think until they do. He pressed his palm flat against the surface. The glass was cold, unyielding. The reflection did the same, skin to skin, separated by nothing but a thin, impossible barrier. For a moment, everything aligned, perfectly. He exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. Maybe this was the trick. Confront it, don't flinch, don't give the fear space to grow. Then the reflection smiled. He hadn't. The smile was small, fleeting, gone almost as soon as it appeared. If he hadn't been staring directly at it, if his attention hadn't been sharpened to a razor's edge, he might have missed it entirely. He stepped back so abruptly, his heel caught on the bath mat. The reflection stepped back too, late again. Silence filled the room, thick and expectant. He turned off the light and left the bathroom in darkness. In the hallway, his breathing slowly steadied. He leaned against the wall, eyes closed, counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. The house creaked softly around him, settling, indifferent. Eventually, he straightened and moved on. But behind him, in the darkened bathroom, the mirror reflected an empty room, and for just a moment longer than necessary, it waited before returning to stillness.
Chapter 3
Chapter 3. My reflection learned my habits. By the third day, the house had learned his schedule. Or maybe it had always known it, and he was only just beginning to notice. Morning light crept into the bedroom in thin gray ribbons. He woke before his alarm, heart already moving too fast, as if something had nudged him out of sleep. For a few seconds he lay still, listening. The house breathed around him, wood settling, pipes ticking, the distant groan of a passing car. Normal. Almost comforting. He avoided mirrors that morning, shaved by touch alone, brushed his teeth while staring at the wall. It felt childish, but it worked. The unease stayed manageable, like a headache dulled by medication. By afternoon, exhaustion set in. Hours passed, though outside the light barely shifted, as if the day itself were stalled. He drifted through the house, restless, unable to focus on anything for long. His thoughts circled the same explanations again and again. Neurological delay, post-traumatic stress, residual hallucinations. The brain protecting itself by misfiring. Mirrors don't think, until they do. The phrase returned, unwelcome and persistent. It was near dusk when he found himself standing in the hallway bathroom again. He hadn't planned to. One moment he was pacing, the next his hand was on the light switch. The bulb flickered to life, humming softly. The mirror filled with his reflection. He stopped short. The reflection had already stopped. He hadn't realized he was slowing down. A thin line of cold ran through his chest. He took a step forward. The reflection moved too, perfectly in sync this time. Too perfect. He lifted his hand slowly. The reflection lifted its hand. At the same speed. Relief fluttered, fragile. Maybe the delay was gone. Maybe this was the end of it. Then the reflection's fingers twitched. His hadn't. The movement was subtle, almost lazy, like a test stretch. The reflection seemed to notice it too, eyes narrowing slightly as if evaluating the result. He lowered his hand. The reflection lowered its hand, but held the final position a fraction too long, fingers still tense after his had relaxed. It wasn't copying him anymore. It was studying. His breathing grew shallow. He tried to control it, slowing each inhale, each exhale. The reflection followed, but exaggerated, chest rising a little too much, falling a little too slowly. A caricature of calm. He frowned. The reflection frowned back, and held it. The expression lingered, stretched unnaturally across its face, as if the muscles beneath the skin had forgotten when to stop. Only after a second did it release, snapping back to neutrality. He stepped back. The reflection hesitated, then stepped back farther than necessary, increasing the distance between them. "Stop," he whispered. The reflection mouthed the word silently. This time, there was no delay at all. A sound escaped him, halfway between a laugh and a sob. He turned away sharply, bracing himself against the sink. His hands trembled, sweat slicked his palms despite the cool air. When he looked up again, cautiously, the reflection was waiting. Patient. That night he tested it without meaning to. In the kitchen he reached for a glass. In the darkened microwave gore his reflection did the same, starting the motion just before he consciously decided to. In the living room he rubbed his eyes. The black screen of the television showed the reflection already lifting its hands. Each time, the anticipation grew stronger. It wasn't predicting randomly. It was learning patterns. He moved through the house like a creature being stalked, every habit suddenly suspect. The way he scratched his jaw when thinking, the way his left shoulder dipped when he turned corners, the way he sighed before sitting down. The reflection knew all of it. By midnight, the house felt smaller. Hallways narrowed, doorways seemed to stretch, shadows pooled in corners where mirrors and glass reflected fragments of movement he didn't want to acknowledge. He stopped in front of the hallway mirror, the tall one near the coat rack, the one he couldn't easily avoid. He stood very still. The reflection stood very still, too. Seconds passed, his heart hammered. He fought the urge to blink. The reflection blinked first. Just once. Slow. Deliberate. His breath hitched. He blinked in response, too late to match it. The reflection smiled faintly, the expression barely there, like the memory of amusement. It wasn't copying him anymore. It was studying. "Why?" he asked, voice cracking. The reflection tilted its head, not mirroring him, but in a way that suggested curiosity, interest. The smile widened just enough to show teeth. He backed away, pulse roaring in his ears. The reflection followed, but its steps were smoother, more confident, as if it already knew how far the glass would allow it to go. He covered the mirror with a coat, heart racing. The fabric fell into place, dulling the world behind it. For a long moment he stood there, listening. Nothing happened. Relief crept in, tentative, but real. He turned away. Behind him, under the coat, something shifted its weight. And somewhere in the dark, it practiced his breathing, getting closer to perfect every time.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. I tested the reflection. It failed. By the fourth day, fear had settled into routine. It no longer arrived as a spike of panic, sharp and unmistakable. Instead, it moved through him quietly, threading itself into every decision: which room to enter, which light to turn on, where to stand when he spoke to himself, and where not to. Most of all, how to move. He began to understand something important. The reflection wasn't omniscient. It wasn't all-knowing. It relied on him, on patterns, on expectation. And expectations could be broken. The realization came while he was standing in the kitchen, staring at his reflection in the darkened oven door. He had reached for a mug, stopped halfway, and watched the reflection's hand continue the motion, fingers curling around empty air. It froze. So did he. For the first time since the accident, the reflection looked uncertain. Its eyes flicked down, then back up, as if recalculating. The hand slowly relaxed, returning to its side with an awkwardness that made his skin prickle. A reflection should never guess. The thought settled into him with strange clarity. That night, he decided to test it. He chose the bathroom mirror first, the smallest room, the easiest to control. He stood centered in front of the glass, feet planted, shoulders squared. The air smelled faintly of mildew and toothpaste. The light hummed overhead, steady and unforgiving. "Okay," he said softly, "let's see how smart you are." The reflection watched him intently. He smiled. The reflection smiled back. Too fast. He dropped the smile instantly, letting his face go slack. The reflection hesitated, then followed, but the damage was done. It had committed too early. His heart pounded, but beneath the fear, something else stirred. Control. He raised his right hand sharply. The reflection raised its left. Wrong. The mistake was unmistakable. The reflection corrected itself almost immediately, shifting to match him, but the error lingered between them like a crack in the glass. Its eyes widened slightly, not in fear, but in recognition. It knew it had failed. A reflection should never guess, he whispered. The reflection mouthed the words with him, perfectly in sync this time. Too perfect, as if memorizing the sentence. He escalated. He laughed suddenly, loud, harsh, a sound that scraped his throat raw. He wasn't amused. The laugh was forced, jagged. The reflection laughed too, but it laughed warmly. The soundless chuckle on its face didn't match the strain in his eyes. Its shoulders shook with a relaxed rhythm, like genuine amusement. Wrong again. He stopped laughing abruptly. His face hardened into a glare, jaw clenched, eyes burning. The reflection kept smiling for half a second longer than it should have. That half second felt enormous. He leaned closer to the mirror, breath fogging the glass. "I'm not scared," he said. It was a lie, a blatant one. The reflection's expression shifted, concern flickering across its features, brows knitting together, sympathy, as if it believed him, as if it didn't know. A reflection should never guess. The room felt tighter now, the walls subtly pressing inward. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, loud enough that he wondered if the reflection could hear it too. He tried one last test. He closed his eyes, just for a moment. Behind his eyelids, darkness bloomed. His pulse raced. He counted silently, 1, 2, 3, and opened his eyes again. The reflection's eyes were already open, already watching. It hadn't blinked. Cold flooded his chest. He staggered back, knocking into the towel rack. The reflection moved too, but it moved smoothly, confidently, as if it had anticipated the stumble, as if it had expected him to fail. "No," he said, shaking his head. "No, no, no." The reflection shook his head as well, but slower, calmer, almost reassuring. He reached out and slapped the mirror. The sound cracked through the bathroom like a gunshot. Pain flared across his palm. The glass held. The reflection flinched. Late. That was the worst part. Not the delay, but the instinct. It had reacted to the threat, not the movement. He stared at it, chest heaving, sweat cooling on his skin. The reflection stared back, eyes bright, breathing steady. They stood there like that for a long time. Eventually, his fear ebbed, replaced with a strange, hollow calm. The tests were over, the conclusion unavoidable. The reflection wasn't malfunctioning. It was learning. And like any predator still learning its prey, it made mistakes. For now. He covered the mirror with a towel and backed out of the room, turning off the light. The hallway stretched ahead of him, dim and quiet. As he walked away, a thought followed close behind him, whispering at the edges of his mind. A reflection should never guess. But something that isn't a reflection has to. And next time, it wouldn't get it wrong.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. The doctors told me to stop looking. The appointment was supposed to be routine. A follow-up, a box to check, another confirmation that survival had been successful and that whatever lingered afterward was merely psychological debris, nothing more than echoes rattling around a brain that had briefly gone dark. The hospital smelled the same as before, clean, sharp, and faintly metallic, the kind of smell that clung to clothes long after you left, as if reminding you where you'd been. He sat in the waiting room beneath fluorescent lights that hummed too softly to notice unless you were already listening for things that didn't want to be heard. Across from him, a large mirror hung on the wall, decorative, framed in brushed steel. He chose a seat where he wouldn't have to see it. When his name was called, he followed the nurse down a narrow hallway. The floor tiles reflected their shoes with dull, distorted clarity. He kept his eyes forward. The exam room was small and windowless, white walls, white cabinets, a white-coated doctor flipping through a clipboard with professional detachment. The mirror over the sink was angled just enough that he could see its edge if he turned his head. He didn't. "So," the doctor said, offering a practiced smile, "how have you been feeling?" He hesitated. The safe answer hovered on his tongue. Better, tired but improving. The kind of response that ended conversations. Instead, he said, Something's wrong. The doctor's pen paused. He explained carefully the delays, the anticipation, the moments when his reflection moved without him. He avoided dramatic language, kept his voice steady, factual, as if describing a rash or recurring pain. The doctor nodded along, expression neutral. Any headaches? Yes. Dizziness? Sometimes. Visual disturbances? Yes, he almost said, but stopped. The doctor jotted notes, then set the clipboard aside. What you're describing is not uncommon after a traumatic event, especially one involving cardiac arrest. Your brain experienced oxygen deprivation. That can cause perceptual delays, dissociation, even hallucinations. Hallucinations. The word landed with dull weight. I'm not imagining it, he said quietly. I believe you're experiencing it, the doctor replied gently. That doesn't mean it's happening the way it feels. He nodded, though the explanation slid past him without settling. The doctor stood and crossed the room to wash his hands. As he did, his gaze flicked toward the mirror above the sink, then away, quickly, deliberately. The movement was subtle, but it was there. Some warnings aren't spoken, they're avoided. The doctor dried his hands and continued talking, tone unchanged. I'd recommend limiting exposure to stimuli that reinforce the anxiety. Mirrors, reflective surfaces. Obsessive checking can make symptoms worse. So I should just stop looking? Yes, the doctor said. Stop looking. The nurse returned with paperwork. She smiled, kind but distant. As she handed him the forms, her eyes briefly caught her reflection in the cabinet door. She flinched. Barely. A tightening around the eyes, a momentary stiffness in her shoulders. Then it was gone. Some warnings aren't spoken, they're avoided. He left the hospital with more questions than answers. On the bus ride home, he watched the city pass in warped reflections along the windows. Faces stretched and blurred, movements lagged and overlapped. For the first time, he noticed how imperfect reflections always were, how forgiving. At home, he did what they told him. He covered the mirrors. Bed sheets over the bathroom glass, towels draped across the hallway mirror, a blanket thrown over the tall one in the bedroom. The house looked wrong afterward, like furniture had been removed without his consent, but it worked. For a while. Hours passed, though outside the night stayed the same. The tension in his chest eased, his breathing slowed. He almost laughed at himself for letting it get so bad. That was when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. He hesitated, then answered. Hello? There was a pause. Static. Breathing. Then a voice, low, uncertain. Did they tell you about the mirrors? His throat tightened. Who is this? Another pause. We were in the same ward. After the accident, I saw your name on a chart. Memory stirred. A man across the hall, older, quiet, curtains always drawn. What about the mirrors? They told me not to look, the voice said. Said it was normal, said it would pass. And it didn't. Silence pressed in around the words. The man continued faster now. I started asking around. Forums, support groups, people who flatlined and came back. Not many talk about it, but the ones who do. A sharp intake of breath. They all mention the same thing, the discomfort, the feeling that reflections aren't cooperative anymore. Some warnings aren't spoken, they're avoided. Did yours begin, then stopped? Did yours hesitate? Yes, the man whispered. The line went dead. He stood there for a long time, phone still pressed to his ear. The house was silent, wrapped in covered glass and shadows. Slowly, deliberately, he turned toward the hallway mirror. The towel covering it was still in place, but the fabric bulged outward slightly, as if something behind it had leaned closer. He stepped back, heart racing. The towel settled. Nothing moved. But in the quiet that followed, one truth became impossible to ignore. The doctors weren't wrong. He should stop looking, because whatever had learned him was learning faster every time he did.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. The reflection started moving first. He followed the doctor's advice. At least he tried to. Mirrors stayed covered, glass surfaces were avoided. He learned to move through the house by memory alone, navigating corners and door frames like a blind man in his own life. The absence of reflections became its own presence, an awareness that pressed in from every angle. For a while, it helped. Sleep came in shallow stretches, food tasted dull but real. The house settled into a tense, watchful truce. He almost convinced himself the worst had passed. Almost. It began with peripheral things, the sort of moments that vanish if you look at them directly. A flash of movement in the dark screen of the television as he crossed the room, a faint shift in the microwave door when he reached for a glass. Each time he turned, there was nothing, only his own tired face, reflected too dimly to confirm anything. He told himself that was good. Then came the smile. He had uncovered the bathroom mirror by accident, tugging at the towel too hard while reaching for a clean one. The fabric slipped free and dropped to the floor. The mirror was exposed before he could stop himself. His reflection was already smiling. Not broadly, not unnaturally, just a small, restrained curve of the mouth, polite, expectant. He froze. The smile lingered. Seconds passed. His heart hammered. His face remained blank, locked in disbelief. Then, slowly, he smiled back. The reflection's smile faded. A chill rolled through him, cold and immediate. He dropped the towel and stepped away, pulse roaring in his ears. It wanted me to notice. That night he didn't sleep. Hours passed, though outside the night stayed the same. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting breaths, listening to the house breathe with him. Every creak sounded deliberate, every settling groan felt timed. When he finally drifted into shallow rest, dreams came fractured and sharp. Mirrors without frames, faces that moved a half-second too soon, hands reaching through glass that rippled like water. He woke gasping. The bedroom was dark, lit only by the pale glow of streetlight leaking through the curtains. He sat up slowly, heart racing, and felt it again, that sensation from the moment he died. Being noticed. Across the room, the tall mirror stood uncovered. He was sure he had left it covered. He remembered the blanket, the weight of it, the way he had tucked it in at the corners. Now the glass was bare. His reflection sat on the edge of the bed, not mimicking him, already there. It wanted me to notice. The reflection tilted its head, studying him with open curiosity. Its eyes were bright, alert in a way his own felt dulled by fear and exhaustion. It smiled again, slowly this time, savoring the movement. He didn't move. Neither did it. Except it did. The reflection lifted its hand. His stayed frozen. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. Fingers flexed once as if testing joints. The reflection examined its own hand, then looked back at him, pleased. The delay was gone. No, worse than gone. It had reversed. His breath came in short bursts. He forced himself to speak. Stop. The reflection cocked its head farther, considering the word like a suggestion rather than a command. Then it shook its head. A reflection should never decide. It wanted me to notice. He squeezed his eyes shut, counting silently. 1, 2, 3. When he opened them again, the reflection was standing.
It took a step back toward the mirror's surface only after he flinched. The delay returned, exaggerated now, mocking, as if it were demonstrating the choice. "This is when I move," the pause seemed to say. Not before, not after. When he finally tore his gaze away, he scrambled for the light switch. The room flooded with brightness. The mirror showed only his own terrified face, sweat-soaked, pale, shaking. Relief crashed over him, heavy and disorienting. He laughed weakly, the sound breaking in his throat. "Just stress," he whispered, "just stress." The reflection laughed too. Late. Too late. He covered the mirror again, hands trembling, and backed out of the room without turning his back on it. From that moment on, the rules changed. The reflection no longer waited to be tested. It initiated. A head tilt here, a blink there, a subtle shift of posture that came before thought, before intention. Always small, always deniable, always enough. It wanted me to notice. By morning, his nerves were raw. Every reflective surface felt like a trap. Windows, screens, polished metal. He caught glimpses of movement that didn't match, smiles that came and went too quickly to confirm. Each time, the same thought followed. It's practicing. He stood in the hallway, staring at the covered mirror, heart pounding. The fabric was still, innocent. Slowly, he reached out and placed his palm against it. From the other side, something pressed back. Not delayed, not guessing, waiting. And this time, he knew with sickening certainty. It wasn't learning anymore. It was ready to lead.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. I saw it blink without me. The house became a maze of blind spots. By morning, every reflective surface felt charged, dangerous in a way that wires are dangerous, silent until they aren't. He moved carefully now, deliberately, memorizing paths that kept glass and polish out of his peripheral vision. The refrigerator door stayed open only long enough to grab food. The television remained off. Windows were passed with his head down, eyes fixed on the floor. Mirrors were no longer objects. They were rules. He covered what he could: sheets, towels, blankets, anything heavy enough to block sight, and, he hoped, attention. The house took on a strange, shrouded look, like a place in mourning. Fabric draped where glass had been. Shadows thickened. Air grew stale, trapped. For a while, the silence held. Hours passed, though outside the day refused to feel like one. Clouds pressed low against the windows, dulling the light into a constant gray. Time stretched thin, elastic, snapping back and forth without warning. He almost believed the precautions were working. Then he heard the sound. A soft, wet click. It came from the hallway. He froze, heart stuttering. The sound was subtle, easily dismissed, a settling house, a distant pipe, but it carried a familiarity that made his skin crawl. A blink. He swallowed and forced himself to move. Each step down the hallway felt like wading through water. The air grew cooler near the tall mirror, the one by the coat rack. He had covered it carefully, double-layered fabric secured at the edges. The covering hung slightly askew. He hadn't touched it. His pulse thundered in his ears as he reached out, fingers trembling. He hesitated, then pulled the fabric free in one sharp motion. The mirror was exposed. His reflection stood there, calm and composed, neutral expression, steady eyes. Nothing moved. Relief came fast and disorienting, leaving him dizzy. He laughed once, breathless. "You're losing it," he muttered. He stared hard at the reflection, daring it to slip. Seconds passed. Then it happened.
The reflection blinked. He didn't. The moment fractured. Time seemed to stall, stretching that single action into something immense and undeniable. The blink was slow, deliberate, the closing and opening of eyelids performed with intention. His eyes burned, tears welled, unblinking. Once it blinks alone, it knows it's real. The phrase arrived fully formed, cold and absolute. He staggered back, breath hitching. No, that's not. The reflection smiled. Not wide, not cruel, certain. It took a step closer to the glass. He bolted. He tore through the house in a blind panic, adrenaline burning away exhaustion. Drawers flew open, closets were ransacked. He grabbed whatever he could, towels, sheets, duct tape from the junk drawer. He moved on instinct, driven by a single pounding thought. Cover them, hide them, kill the sight. The bathroom mirror went first, covered, taped, sealed until no edge showed. The bedroom mirror followed, then the hallway one again, layered thick this time, fabric wrapped tight like a body prepared for burial. He didn't stop there. He turned picture frames to face the wall, threw a blanket over the television, draped a coat over the microwave door. Every surface that could betray him was neutralized. The house looked wrong, like it had been blinded. For a moment, standing in the center of it all, he felt safer. The air seemed to loosen its grip on his lungs. His heart slowed from a sprint to a staggered jog. He sank on the couch, shaking, and let out a long, shuddering breath. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Relief crept in, tentative but warm. Maybe this was enough. Maybe the rule still mattered. Maybe it needed sight, needed acknowledgement to act. A laugh bubbled up, hysterical and weak. "That's it," he said aloud. "You can't see me now." The laugh died in his throat. From somewhere in the house came another sound, a soft, deliberate click. Not one, two. Blink, blink. He stood slowly, dread pooling in his stomach. The sounds came again, closer this time, rhythmic, practiced. He backed away, spine pressing against the wall, eyes darting over the covered shapes around him. Fabric shifted subtly, as if stirred by a breath that didn't belong to the house. "You can't," he said, voice breaking. "You can't see." The blinking stopped. Silence stretched. Then a new sound joined it. Fabric sliding, slow, careful. He watched in horror as the blanket over the television screen sagged inward slightly, as if something behind it had leaned closer. The outline of a face pressed against the cloth, distorting it just enough to suggest features. Eyes, lids closing, opening. Once it blinks alone, it knows it's real. He ran for the front door, hands slick with sweat, fumbling with the lock. It resisted for half a second, just long enough to spike his panic, then gave way. Cold air rushed in as he stumbled outside. He didn't stop running until the house was behind him, looming and dark, every window a potential witness. Only when he reached the end of the street did he slow, gasping, heart pounding. He turned back. The house was still, quiet, but in the front window, uncovered and glowing faintly with interior light, his reflection stood waiting, eyes open, unblinking, and smiling like it had all the time in the world.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. Something Trapped Behind the Glass. He didn't go back to the house that night. Instead, he wandered until his legs burned and his lungs ached, moving through streets washed in sodium light and damp air. Store windows were his enemies now, long panes of glass that turned the world into layered reflections. He kept his head down, eyes fixed on the pavement, on cracks and chewing gum and fallen leaves, anything that wasn't himself. By dawn, exhaustion forced him into a decision. If he couldn't run from it, he would understand it. The public library opened early.
The building was old, all stone and narrow windows, the kind of place that felt heavy with accumulated thought. Inside, the air smelled of dust and paper and something faintly sweet, decay disguised as preservation. He chose a corner table far from the windows. Hours passed, though outside the sky shifted through shades of gray without ever becoming truly bright. He started broadly: near-death experiences, cardiac arrest survivors, neurological after-effects. Medical journals yielded familiar language: hallucinations, dissociation, identity disturbance, words that tried to contain the impossible by shrinking it. They didn't fit. He narrowed the search. Folklore. The results multiplied quickly: stories from every culture, every era, reflections that lingered, doubles that smiled wrong, mirrors covered in houses of mourning, warnings repeated across centuries, dressed in different symbols but sharing the same shape. It wasn't about vanity. It wasn't about superstition. It was about boundaries. In Eastern European tales, there were zamienniki, replacements that slipped through reflective surfaces when someone survived what they shouldn't have. In Japanese folklore, mirrors were said to hold the soul's shadow, not its image. Celtic myths spoke of the fetch, a double that appeared before death or after a death that didn't finish its work. Always the same pattern: not hauntings, replacements. He leaned back in his chair, heart pounding, the pieces beginning to align in ways he didn't want them to. Death doesn't copy, it substitutes. The phrase repeated in his mind, heavy and certain. He dug deeper. Accounts from the 20th century, letters, journals, psychiatric case notes written in careful clinical language that danced around the truth. Survivors describing subtle wrongness, families noticing changes that couldn't be named, reflections that didn't quite behave. One case stopped him cold. A man pronounced dead for 4 minutes after a factory accident, revived, returned home. Within weeks, his wife reported that he watched himself too often, that he avoided mirrors, then sought them obsessively, that he began accusing his reflection of trying to learn his voice. The man disappeared. His house was found empty, mirrors shattered, no sign of struggle. Only one line in the final report, scribbled in the margin by an unknown hand. The glass was intact from the inside. A chill crept through him. Mirrors are not surfaces, he realized. They are borders, thin ones. He closed the books, hands trembling, and pressed his palms against the wood. The wood was solid, real. He focused on that sensation, grounding himself. If mirrors were boundaries, then what was on the other side? He thought back to the moment he died, the darkness, the stillness, the feeling not of being watched, but of being noticed, like a hand pausing on a doorknob when it heard movement inside. What if something had been waiting there? Not a demon, not a ghost, a vacancy. Death doesn't copy, it substitutes. The idea settled into him with sickening clarity. When he died, even briefly, something crossed the boundary meant to be one way. When he came back, the space wasn't empty anymore. He wasn't haunted, he was doubled. The sun dipped lower outside the library windows, turning them into mirrors. He flinched, instinctively shifting his chair so the glass was no longer in his line of sight. As he packed up his notes, a final realization took shape, quiet, inevitable. If mirrors were boundaries, then covering them hadn't been a solution. It had been a delay. Boundaries don't disappear when you stop looking at them. They wait. He left the library at dusk, the world outside dim and distorted. Streetlights flickered on, each one reflected endlessly in car windows and shop fronts. He moved quickly now, breath shallow, every step fueled by the same terrible understanding. The thing behind the glass wasn't trying to escape. It was trying to trade places. At the edge of the street, he caught his reflection in a darkened storefront by accident. Just a glimpse, enough to see the familiar shape of his face. And something else. The reflection raised its hand in a small, almost courteous gesture. He hadn't moved. He turned away, heart racing, the final warning echoing in his mind like a tolling bell. Death doesn't copy, it substitutes. And sooner or later, substitutions have to be completed.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 9. It tried to switch places. He returned to the house just before nightfall, not because he wanted to, but because the alternative felt worse. The streets offered too many windows, too many chances to glimpse himself in passing glass, each one a reminder that the boundary followed him wherever reflections existed. The house, at least, was familiar. It stood quiet when he unlocked the door, dark and patient, as if it had never tried to betray him. The air inside smelled stale, heavy with fabric and dust from all the covered surfaces. Sheets and blankets still draped every mirror, every screen, every polished plane. A mausoleum for sight. He shut the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing hard. His pulse slowed only slightly. The knowledge he carried weighed on him now, knowledge that changed the shape of fear. This wasn't a monster trying to escape. It was a replacement trying to return home. Death doesn't copy, it substitutes. The thought echoed as he moved deeper into the house. Each step felt deliberate, final. He wasn't running anymore. Whatever this was, it had already followed him everywhere else. He needed answers. In the living room, he uncovered the tall mirror by the window. The fabric slid away without resistance. The reflection stood waiting. But it wasn't smiling this time. Its face was twisted with something like panic, brows drawn tight, mouth trembling, eyes wide and wet, as if on the verge of tears. It clutched at its chest. He staggered back, heart lurching in response despite himself. The reflection gasped, clutched harder. Its mouth opened in a silent cry. Pain, fear. It was copying his oldest memory now, the moment of impact, the crushing force, the suffocating dark. No, it wasn't copying. It was performing. It came back first, he whispered. The phrase grounded him, sharpened his thoughts. If it had returned first, if it believed it belonged here, then this display wasn't an accident. It was leverage. The reflection stumbled forward, pressing its palms against the glass. Its shoulders shook with soundless sobs. It shook its head slowly, pleading, "Help me." The words weren't spoken, but they didn't need to be. He felt them settle into his chest, heavy and insistent. For a moment, just a moment, his resolution faltered. What if he was wrong? What if he was the substitute? The thought slithered in, cold and poisonous. The reflection seized on it instantly. It straightened, eyes locking onto his with fierce intensity. Its mouth moved, shaping words he could almost hear. "I'm supposed to be here," it pointed at itself, then to him, then shook its head again. No, 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 frantic now. It came back first. The room seemed to tilt, his vision blurred at the edges. The house creaked softly, settling around them like an audience holding its breath. "Stop," he said, though the word felt thin. The reflection mirrored him, but with too much urgency, nodding as if grateful he'd finally understood. It smiled through tears. A familiar smile. His smile. Rage surged,
hot and clarifying. "No," he said louder, "you don't get to decide that." The reflection recoiled, startled. For the first time, its performance cracked. The fear on its face flickered, just briefly, into something sharper: annoyance. It straightened, wiping its expression clean. When it spoke again, its mouth moved with precision, its eyes cold and steady. "You don't remember what it was like," it seemed to say. "I do." Images flooded his mind unbidden. The darkness between heartbeats, the stillness, the sense of being noticed. Understanding crashed into him like a wave. Of course it thought it was the original. It had crossed the boundary first, while his body lay dead, empty, waiting. It came back first. The reflection leaned closer, pressing its forehead against the glass. Its breathing slowed, synced deliberately with his. In, out, in, out. Then, carefully, it stepped back and waited. A silent invitation, a trade. His heart pounded, sweat slicked his palms. Every instinct screamed at him to look away, to run, to destroy the mirror and everything tied to it. But destruction wouldn't fix this. Boundaries didn't disappear when broken. They reversed. "I know what you want," he said, voice shaking but steady enough. "You want me to step aside." The reflection nodded eagerly. He shook his head. "You're not me." The reflection's face hardened. The mask slipped completely now, revealing something old and patient beneath. Its lips curved into a slow smile. "Neither are you," its eyes replied. The lights flickered. The glass rippled. For a terrifying second, he felt himself pulled forward, not physically, but internally. A tug behind the eyes, like gravity reversing. The reflection leaned in, anticipation radiating from it. He screamed and stumbled back, slamming into the table behind him. The pull broke. The reflection slammed its hands against the glass in fury. The sound rang through the house like a bell. They stared at each other, chest heaving, the truth laid bare between them. This was no haunting. This was a custody dispute, and only one of them could remain on this side of the boundary. The reflection lifted its hand again. Not to mimic, not to guess, but to reach. And this time, it didn't wait for permission.
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10. The mirror finally matched me. The silence afterward was absolute. Not the quiet of relief, not the calm that follows resolution, but the heavy, expectant stillness of something holding its breath. He stood alone in the living room, chest heaving, sweat cooling against his skin. The mirror before him was whole again, smooth, still, empty. For a long time, he didn't move. His reflection stood exactly where it should. When he lifted his hand, it lifted its hand. When he blinked, it blinked. No delay, no anticipation, no defiance. Perfect. The terror didn't fade. It deepened. Perfect copies don't hesitate. He backed away slowly, every nerve screaming that this was wrong. The house felt different now, lighter almost, as if a pressure he hadn't fully noticed had been released. The air moved more freely. The walls seemed to recede. A victory, then. That was the lie his body wanted to believe. He tested it carefully. He smiled. The reflection smiled with him, matching the curve of his mouth exactly. He frowned. It frowned. He raised his hand abruptly. The reflection followed without lag or lead. Flawless. He should have felt relief. Instead, dread pooled low and heavy in his stomach, because this wasn't how it had behaved before. Before, it had rushed, anticipated, performed, pleaded, fought.
This was different. This was restraint. Hours passed, though outside the night stayed the same. He moved through the house slowly, deliberately, checking every mirror, every surface. All of them reflected him with pristine accuracy. No smiles out of place, no independent motion. The house felt obedient. He sat at the kitchen table and laughed softly, a thin, hollow sound. "It's over," he said, testing the words aloud. The reflection in the microwave door repeated the sentence silently, perfectly. Still, something gnawed at him. The folklore echoed in his mind, the reports, the vanished men, the shattered houses. Death doesn't copy, it substitutes. Substitutions aren't rushed, they're prepared. Near dawn, exhaustion finally dragged him down. He slept on the couch, lights on, mirrors uncovered now, daring them, watching them until his eyes closed. Dreams came softly this time. No glass, no darkness, just repetition. He woke to sunlight, real sunlight. For a moment, just one, everything felt normal. The house looked ordinary. The mirrors reflected the morning in warm, forgiving tones. Birds chirped outside. A car passed. Life resuming. He stood in the bathroom, brushing his teeth, watching himself closely. Too closely. His reflection met his gaze with calm familiarity. Then it breathed. In, out. Exactly with him. Perfect copies. Don't hesitate. The realization hit him slowly, spreading like ice through his veins. It wasn't testing anymore. It wasn't learning. It was waiting. Waiting for a moment he wouldn't be watching so closely. Waiting for exhaustion, for distraction, for trust. Because hesitation was no longer useful. Synchronization was. He leaned closer to the mirror, studying every detail of his own face, the scars, the lines, the tiny imperfections that made him unmistakably himself. The reflection studied him back, not with curiosity, with ownership. "I know what you are," he whispered. The reflection nodded, just once. They stood there together, indistinguishable, breathing the same air, occupying the same moment. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the boundary shift, not breaking, not opening, but thinning, like ice beneath a steady weight. Perfect copies don't hesitate, they replace. He stepped back from the mirror slowly, heart steady now, fear transformed into something colder and more resigned. Whatever happened next wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be sudden, it would be seamless. And someday, soon, someone would look at him and think he seemed just a little different. Not wrong, just finished. The mirror watched him go, and for the first time since he died, it didn't move at all.
I thought mirrors showed us who we are, but they only show what's closest. When I died, something crossed the line before I did. It learned my face, my timing, my fear, and when it finally stopped hesitating, I understood the truth. It wasn't trapped in the mirror, it was waiting for me to trust it. So tonight, when you pass a reflective surface, don't check your hair, don't admire your face, just watch carefully and ask yourself one question. Did it move when you did, or did it move first? If this story unsettled you, don't look away. Subscribe, listen, and remember, reflections should never hesitate.